Welcome to San Mateo County Today. Conversations with government leaders throughout San Mateo County. Here's your host, Marshall Wilson.
Welcome to San Mateo County Today. I'm your host, Marshall Wilson. We have a fantastic show for you today. First off, I have Mike Brosnan, San Mateo County's first human trafficking coordinator. And next up, Perez, the mayor of Foster City. I'm here today with Mike Brosnan, San Mateo County's first human trafficking coordinator. He's a former South San Francisco police officer who now is heading up our county's efforts to combat human trafficking. So Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Marshall. Thank you for having me.
So tell me, how did this position come about?
Well, it came about in the July 1 of 2015 after the county manager's office and the board of supervisors recognized that there needed to be a little more coordination in terms of our effort to disrupt and to educate our citizenry in the area of human trafficking.
Now, as the human trafficking, we hear a lot about it. When the Super Bowl was in town, we heard a lot about human trafficking. San Mateo County, we can talk about this, recently had a prosecution. Is it something that's been going on for a very long time that we're just now hearing about, or is it really growing in prevalence? Can you tell us about the problem?
The problem's been around for a long time, Marshall, and because San Mateo County does not have the volume that, say, San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose has, we didn't have to engage as quickly as our neighbors, but it's in San Mateo County. Our chiefs put together a protocol more than 2 years ago, and we've been following that protocol. But we've been following that protocol as a kind of loose guide, and it's time to engage in the operation on a more than once a month basis, and it's time to engage our public to add eyes and ears to the subject.
Well, what are you doing on a day-to-day basis? How are you going about educating the public about what to look for about human trafficking?
All right, so my job is to initiate conversations. Mm-hmm. And it's a heavy topic. It's a very confusing topic. It's one that people are slow to talk about. But once we start to dispel some of the myths and actually start talking about how we are truly in a position to save victims, there's a lot of people that want to talk about it and get involved.
Well, in human trafficking, what are we talking about? We often think about the sex trade. Let's be frank about that. But from what I understand, it's really much more than that.
Yes, you know, it is. If you think about any persons that are vulnerable, being pulled into something they may or may not want to do. The commercial sex trade is the one we think about, but it's absolutely a part of the labor force as well. I mean, and that's in San Mateo County as well, whether it's a inappropriate nanny-family relationship, whether it's a inappropriate business-employee relationship, say in a restaurant. The labor side is something that we have to educate ourselves and educate the public on as much as the commercial sex side.
Well, we're often hear that, let's be frank, that prostitution, say, is the world's oldest profession or it's a victimless crime, but that really is not the case, right, from what you found out.
Right, definitely two myths that we're dispelling. It's never been a profession, and quite frankly, most of the studies that are being done are with victims are showing that they do not want to be there, that they are there because they're being forced to be there. They're there for fraudulent reasons, or they're being coerced. 3 words within the section of law that law enforcement uses to hold traffickers accountable: force, fraud, and coercion.
Well, what are some of the signs that we always hear today about people should, look out, speak up? What are some of the signs that people can witness human trafficking and do something about it?
Right. So we all, and there's a lot. Well, we could probably put some websites up on the screen at the end of this, but I want our public to educate themselves much more than just watching this show. But we all have a gut feeling for what is normal, and if something, even with a little bit of education, if something doesn't look right, then please say something. And we're sending that message to all parts of this, whether it's the hotel, hospitality industry, the transportation industry. We could see it in schools, we can see it in hospitals. All our first responders, law enforcement, police, firefighters, paramedics, could see something that is just an abnormal control like relationship that needs to to be investigated a little bit further.
We need the public's help. If you see something, say something. Oftentimes, if something's going on in the neighborhood, we don't want to somehow look like we're picking on anyone or being a busybody. This is not about being a busybody. This is about being vigilant about a very serious scourge in this country. Anywhere between 100,000 and 300,000 children, average age 12 to 14 years, is sex trafficked in this country every year. The drug cartels have recognized that this is much more successful in that you can sell a kid over and over again. You can sell drugs only once. They can make easily $600,000 a year sex trafficking just a few girls and or boys. So the message is really clear. This case was prosecuted because one young woman, a hotel clerk, identified something that didn't add up. And she had the good sense to call the police. And because of her efforts, there are 5 victims now that are out of the clutches of sex traffickers. And there are 3 sex traffickers that are behind bars. No one is welcomed in San Mateo County if you're a sex trafficker. And if we find you, we will put you behind bars.
What we're all engaged in, these are rescue operations. We are truly rescuing these young women, and it's almost always about 98% women involved in this. We are rescuing them from a truly deplorable circumstance. So I'm very proud of what the police department and my prosecutor has done, and I think as a community, everybody in our community should also be very proud. Thank you for letting me speak today.
Well, and recently, San Mateo County announced the prosecution of a human trafficker. Tell us about that case.
Great case. It's a case that we're using now as a model for all cases that start off and could happen within the hotel industry. It was an alert trained clerk in South San Francisco who saw a trafficker check in with 2 girls on a Friday, 2 different girls on a Saturday. After she received that training, she knew that was abnormal, and that's all she needed to do or see to call us. And the investigation starts there. That investigation concluded just a couple of weeks ago with a prosecution of 3 suspects, and we saved 5 victims. One that we're hoping that both the hotel and hospitality industry use as a model, but law enforcement uses as a model as well.
And I think a word you use just there is really key, to talk about them as victims. They're not willing participants in this. And state law has also been changing as well. I understand Prop 35 passed in November 2012, which really sort of sets a higher threshold or more penalties for engaging in human trafficking.
Right. So that was a landmark piece of legislation that California's very proud of. 81+% of California voted for Prop 35, and Prop 35 did really 3 main things. One, it mandated training for law enforcement. 2, it elevated the accountability for our traffickers by way of mandatory state prison and by way of mandatory sex registry, like a sex offender.
And we've also talked just a little bit off air that there's more resources now for the victims than in the past. Because if you were, say you wanted to get out of this trade, what did you do? How do you go about doing that? And you were telling me there's some more resources available and more sensitivity towards that. If you could tell us a bit about that.
Well, one of the things that I wasn't a huge participant in during my law enforcement career that I am actively engaged in now is the collaboration with our advocacy groups. We have one group specifically that has grown out of a regional effort called No Traffic Ahead. It's 55 different entities coming together with like goals in mind. And these like goals are to educate, but they're also to provide services and through the survivor voice, which is huge, provide a path of hope whereby somebody that's in the life today, thinking that she'll never get out, can have someone to help them get out in terms of exit strategies. It's still a huge gap. It's a gap in our region, by way of housing alone, but it's one that where I'm inspired that we are going to make progress is because of what I've seen in the last 25 years in domestic violence. Where once San Mateo County puts a value, and or the Bay Area as a region puts a value on a topic, we make it work to the end. And exit strategies was a huge piece of the domestic violence process. It's a huge piece of this process. It's a gap still, but in time, we're going to get there and save more people.
Well, and as awareness grows, where do you see this going? I think the domestic violence is a prime example. You think 25, 30 years ago, people shrugged it off. It was a private matter, came out of the shadows. Same thing with human trafficking now. It's really being talked about. Where do you see this going? Do you think that people are going to be more aware of it, and thereby the business is going to die off? Because it really is a business. If there's not money in it and there's a big sanction for getting caught, those traffickers aren't going to do it any longer.
It's absolutely a business. The numbers change all the time, but the number that's consistent as a global industry, $32 billion as a global industry, and it's absolute. The greed and the desire for financing or funding and or revenue is what's driving us, and we have to disrupt it like a business. We have to disrupt it from the supply, from the demand, and from the distribution. And on the demand side, the buyers. The piece that I'm encouraged by is that society no longer calls that acceptable. Mm-hmm. It's no longer acceptable to engage in buying commercial sex. And once society says we do not want that anymore, then it'll change. And on the demand side, that's a big piece. Legislation is happening there too. The section of law that holds buyers and our sales accountable is the same law. There's pieces of legislation that's going to be presented that's going to separate those two, hoping to hold buyers even more accountable than the sales side of it. And then the distribution side, the third part of the business model, is the traffickers. It is our suspects that are exploiting all ages within this topic, and all the kind of facilitation businesses, whether you're a tattoo parlor doing pimp branding tattoos, or you're a consistent hotel manager that's taking cash off the sides, off the books, or using a consistent room out of the view of the public to do this business. So the distribution side, the sales side, and the demand side are the business model that we're looking to disrupt all together.
And you're seeing more of these resources being put forward. Again, you were the first human trafficking coordinator. Can you talk about how this position is being funded and where you see it going in the future?
Well, it's currently being funded by Measure A, and I think San Mateo County should be proud of our Board of Supervisors for having the vision to include a topic like human trafficking within a mission of infrastructure, because that's exactly what we're doing. I'm the son of a general contractor, and I feel I'm building a foundation, an infrastructure, so that we can build a better tomorrow on. Hopefully we'll find alternate funding because we're probably going to need more in terms of those exit strategies. But we have a good start. We have a good start right now. It's being supported by the Police and Sheriff's Association. It's a three-part proposal that includes law enforcement, that includes health services agency, and it includes probation. So we're trying to bring the welfare system, the foster care system, juvenile justice and adult justice together to work together so that we can not only disrupt, but more importantly, prevent, at the younger ages.
Mike, thank you so much for being on San Mateo County today, and thank you for helping raise awareness about this big issue.
Thank you, Marshall. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Welcome back to San Mateo County Today. I'm your host, Marshall Wilson. Thanks for joining us. I'm here now with the Mayor of Foster City, Perez. We've got a lot to talk about Foster City, but first I want to know a little bit more about you. How did you land in Foster City?
Well, that's a long story, but the long and the short of it, I graduated law school and I was done with my Olympic career, and I was working actually for the Olympic Council of Asia at that point. I had a few friends out this way, and there was a young lady who thought I should be in San Francisco, and so I came to visit and never left, and then was looking for a place actually to start our development center for young children in the sport that I do. Came across Foster City and walked by that beautiful lagoon and looked at this old suntan place and decided this was a great place to both raise my family and start our business.
Terrific. Well, you're now the mayor of Foster City, and now you're facing all those big issues that parents and residents talk a lot about. I want to talk with you first about what I think a lot of people think about Foster City these days is a lot of traffic. What is Foster City doing to alleviate some of that traffic? I know it's not all Foster City's fault. You get all that cut through to the bridge.
Sure.
What's going on today?
You know, we have some interesting challenges because we are kind of a small community off to the side, kind of an eddy in the traffic, if you will. We experience that traffic from the north-south commute as well as the east-west on 92. So we're limited in our options as to what we can correct as far as externally to the city, except with a regional effort. We're working with Assemblymember Kevin Mullen to actually, we're going out during the busiest time with him in a van so he can experience what we experience. I believe that it's going to require us looking at that 92-101 exchange and redesigning it and rebuilding it. Unfortunately, most of the Measure A funds that are being used now are being used for every other point of egress up and down that area.
That's the county transportation tax.
Correct. And as a result of that, for some reason they skipped over 92. So we're going to take a hard look at that and try to find some solutions. What we're doing internally in the city, though, is we're increasing our left turn lanes, we're looking at our signaling, and we're trying to get our employers to provide transportation. So, for example, our new employer, Illumina, is providing $1 million a year for their transportation solution, which includes buses and Ubers.
Great. We've got a lot to talk about. I also want to talk about the levee project you have going on right now. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, we've had great support from our representative in the Senate, you know, Representative Spear, and so she worked to allow us to stay in the exclusion zone. So basically right now, we're being given an opportunity to address that issue. We've come up with a both responsible and creative solution that needs to be funded. It'll come to our city for approval and a design of a new levee system which will raise it so that it deals not only with the current challenges of the flood zones, but for the 50 to 100 years from now flood challenges. Because we do believe that global warming is real. And in addition to that, we want our citizens to be safe. Well, and we're safe now, our levees are up to standard. But more importantly, not to incur the insurance cost of $2,000 a year. So this would basically be a parcel tax of roughly about $90 to $100 a year, I believe.
And you're going to be going to the voters for that?
We will, but it's a little bit different structure. We don't have to wait for an election to do it. We'll do it as a special assessment, and it'll be based upon parcel tax or a property leasehold. So everyone in the city, including the businesses, will get to vote on it. And when they see our solution, which will include the levy being raised, amenities for the public in park facilities, and improving that levee so we widen that the levee pedway.
Got it.
It's very tricky on a tongue.
Yes.
So people that use it for running and walking will be able to, and I'm looking at a solution that would include solar panels. So I don't want to speak too much at this point about it, but it's a very creative solution.
Well, one of the big reasons people move to Foster City, of course, is the quality of life there. You talked about it yourself, walking by that beautiful lagoon one day. What are you doing to maintain that quality of life in Foster City?
Well, you know, 2 years ago, and roughly about 3 years ago, we started that effort. And we had created an economic development plan that was very sophisticated in scope and quite frankly, I think groundbreaking. Since that time, every other city has implemented their economic development plan. And in fact, one of them kind of used the format of ours and did exactly what we're doing. We re-looked at that in January as part of our policy calendar, and we fast-forwarded that effort. So what you'll see in the next month or so is you'll see exactly what it is, but more importantly, how we plan to fund it and how we plan to implement it. So by June of this year, the economic development plan, which had kind of been stalled for a little while, will actually be implemented to the benefit of our city. It will provide us with much needed funds so that we can maintain the quality of life with police, fire, and safety, our staff levels, but more importantly, new and creative ideas to enhance the things that we have in our city that people enjoy.
What are some of those ideas for the economic development of Foster City?
Well, you know, so we've looked at things that include using the Chamber of Commerce, so as a provider of services for us to do things that would require a consultant usually, because they are the best at knowing what we do. We're looking at enhancing both the way that we use that money to create things that the public cares about. So we have a park in lieu fee, which takes care of most of our improvements, and so we're adding a bocce ball court, by way of example. We're going to need to replace our recreation center. So the question becomes, what do we want to do with it? Do we want to recreate the same thing? Or do we want to look at something that was 40 years old and bring it current? So basically, the economic development plan is taking a relook at what was originally the master plan, is now called the general plan, and what is the best use for that land to the betterment of the public. We continue to experience challenges with the school and our overcrowding, and that's a different issue, but it's not something we'll address by part of it, but it is something we're concerned about.
Well, Foster City always seems to me it's one of those cities that people love so much and they care so deeply about it and people want to live there, but that creates a whole ripple effect of problems, of course. Yeah. The same way of people visiting your parks, people want to live there. And let's talk about housing. There's a housing crisis up and down the peninsula, this whole region. What's Foster City doing?
So we've created a series of roundtables because that conversation tends to be truncated sometimes and it's emotionally based and people emote rather than think through the issue. And it's going to require a sophisticated approach where we're going to have to examine the benefits of living in Foster City, the benefits of being close to both Silicon Valley and San Francisco, and what level of responsibility we want to take for housing and for traffic, and what we're willing to spend to accomplish it. So I'm looking forward to sitting down with our residents to talk about the benefits of being in Foster City, but more importantly, what are we willing to do to help traffic by providing maybe workforce housing, by relooking at land that we currently own or we might be able to buy to both satisfy the needs for additional retail centers or updated retail centers, mixed-use projects, or housing. If we keep having an adverse reaction to housing in general, we are going to continue to be part of the problem rather than part of the solution. It's not until we realize that it's a regional problem. We need to do our part with regard to housing, and it will actually alleviate traffic. If we can have that sort of conversation with our residents and our businesses, then we'll be well on the way to solving at least a portion of the project, along with our friends in San Mateo, who are building probably even more than we are. And we need to look at our traffic mitigation efforts together. We need to start to look at our EIR concerns together, because with all that stuff that's going up and down El Camino and where the old Kmart is, we need to have a better and more cooperative solution, I think, so that both of our cities can alleviate what we think are our individual traffic concerns and housing.
So here I have a two-part question, because it wouldn't be fair just to ask you the first part. But what is the biggest complaint you hear from people out there in Foster City or residents? And then I want to follow it up with what do people like the best when they come up and say, this is what I love about our city?
So, you know, so the good thing about running for re-election is you've done some stuff, and then you haven't done some other stuff. But they're going to tell you what they like and what they don't like. The single biggest complaint is the idea that we would add more housing. People they feel that they do not want any more people in Foster City, that we have maximized our land use, and that was the single biggest complaint, followed by additional commercial development. So there's this anti-commercial development. However, when you dig a little bit deeper, what you hear is it's not those things that they're worried about the impacts. The single biggest accolade for Foster City is the quality of life. We have the best police department. We have the singularly best fire department. We have response times that are in the 2-minute range. And if you call, you get a police officer you know and a fire person that you know, and we have the best response times. So along that way, people love our public safety. They love our staff. We created a new application called Foster City Access, where if you see a problem in our city, you can click, take a picture of it, write a description, and in real time it'll be sent to our staff, who will address it by that evening and tell you the solution. But more importantly, you can see everybody else's problems and solutions. So we're continually trying to use technology to gain better public access and input, but more importantly, to engage our public in sophisticated conversations.
Well, it's interesting that, so I can go out there, take some picture on my smartphone, and is that an expectation on the staff's part that they must get back to you in a given period of time?
Absolutely. So we just had a meeting about this. As a test, I took a picture of myself, and I said, I don't like the mayor. What can I do about it? Can we get a new one? This guy he's a little funny looking. And I sent it to staff, and I had a response the next day. I won't share the response.
I was going to say, I want to find that one out.
No, it was a good response, but then again, we signed their paychecks, so it should be a good response. But no, we take that seriously, and yes, our staff, the good news is we are a small city. We have, I think, about 187 staff, and we're looking to increase that. We have staff that's well compensated, but more importantly, we have a great city to work in. We have one of the lowest crime rates. We have one of the lowest complaint rates. And in a city where your biggest problem is community development and not the police or the fire, then you're blessed.
And how can people learn more about what's going on in Foster City? I understand you've launched a new newsletter. We do. We have a new newsletter, and you can sign up for it on a listserv, and it will talk to you about the projects that are going on. We have a bridge closing, which is going to take roughly 4 months, and it's unfortunate, but it needs to be done. It's settling. So we took that project and we funded it through our capital improvement. But you can go in the newsletter, it'll tell you about that closure, how long it'll be and why it's happening. And we do that with virtually every project. So our next biggest project, and it'll be in the newsletter, will be the Gilead improvements, because they're adding some space and they need to upgrade the PG&E lines. What is that bridge?
So Vintage Park Bridge is the bridge that services the Visa corridor, and it's between access on Foster City Boulevard and Edgewater. So the good news is there's a lot of other ways to go, just avoid that bridge. And I would say we did a traffic count, bike count. We had 2 bicycles that go over it and roughly 20 people. The rest are cars trying to get to 92. Good news for them, we're going to adjust those traffic signals, and in real time we're going to look at the effects of it and try to mitigate them over the 4 months. We had looked at other alternatives like partial closure, but that would have added months to the project and roughly an additional $1 million in costs, and we just didn't think that was prudent governance for our taxpayers.
We only got a few moments left, so what are your hopes for 2016?
Well, for 2016, I'm looking forward. We had a very aggressive policy calendar. I've tasked my fellow council members to sit on 3 subcommittees to deal with both land use and land use questions. We have a business leadership council meeting coming up with our businesses to talk about the challenges they face, and I'll be sitting on that one. We have a economic development one that I've given to 2 other council members because I've spent my time on that with Vice Mayor Charlie Brunitsky, and so it's going to be in better hands or different hands. And I'm looking forward to those 3 policy initiatives being moved forward this year very aggressively. But quite frankly, the thing that's changed in our city is the way we do business. So the council has made a decision to make more business-like meetings that are focused on delivery of information, but more importantly, decision-making. So if you watch our council meetings now, they're shorter, they're more direct, they're more to the point, but more importantly, everyone's encouraged to participate and be engaged. And I just think it's been fantastic. I look forward to finishing my year this year as the mayor, and then going back to the cheap seats and letting somebody else take over the reins of the new environment we've created for success.
All right. Thank you for joining us on San Mateo County Today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure meeting you.
And thank you for watching San Mateo County Today. I'm Marshall Wilson. Do you like what you see on Peninsula Television? You can help us keep the lights on. Go to our website at pentv.tv, look for the little Donate Now button, and see if you can help us out. Thank you very much.